Good evening. For those of you that weren't here when the music started, I want to welcome you to the 2019 annual meeting of the Jefferson County Farmers and Neighbors Organization, commonly called JFAN. I'm John Ikerd. I'm a member of the board of directors. I'm your host for this evening. The theme of this year's meeting is Factory Farms Are Creating Superbugs. How can we protect life-saving antibiotics and ourselves? You know, antibiotics have been called the miracle drugs because they basically revolutionized modern medicine. Diseases that were once routinely killed people are now being cured relatively easily and simply with affordable prescription antibiotics. However, the effectiveness of these antibiotics in fighting such diseases today is at risk. It's the overuse and misuse of antibiotics in producing antibiotic-resistant bacteria that commonly called superbugs. And now these superbugs pose a worldwide public health risk to people. The routine use of antibiotics in factory farms, or CAFOs, has been clearly identified as a major contributor to this growing problem. The World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and even a special United Nations summit of the heads of state, they all link the crisis of antibiotic resistance to the routine use of antibiotics in factory farms. And they've all called for strict regulations of antibiotic use in animal agriculture to minimize the risk of antibiotic resistance. Our main speaker this evening, our keynote speaker, is Dr. Lance Price, who's been a major contributor to the scientific research that supports all of these recommendations. So what has our U.S. government done in response? The answer is very little. The routine use of antibiotics is still allowed for disease prevention in CAFOs. They just need a prescription from a veterinarian to use it. In CAFOs, the risk of infectious disease outbreak is almost always present, so veterinarians have little difficulty finding justification for a prescription, and particularly when the veterinarian's on the payroll of the CAFOs. This legalized creation of superbugs is a classic example of the failure of government to regulate CAFOs. For example, whenever opponents ask for laws to mitigate the negative environmental impacts of CAFOs, we get effectively grants, laws that effectively grant the CAFOs a license to produce in the form of ineffective regulations. And when reporters reveal animal welfare abuse in CAFOs, the governments pass ag-gag laws that make investigation of such abuse a crime. And when counties around the country pass health ordinances to protect public health from the risk of CAFOs, the state governments take away the right of local control, as they have here in Iowa. When opponents win nuisance lawsuits against CAFOs, the governments pass even stronger right to farm regulations to protect the CAFOs from any further legal action. The agricultural establishment consistently uses its economic power to maintain the political power to simply double down in response to every legal challenge to CAFOs. You know, this certainly is not the first time that our government has given preference to the economic preferences of agribusiness priority over the basic human rights of people. For example, the economic foundation of this nation, and certainly its agricultural foundation, was built on the institution of slavery. The founders of this nation knew that slavery was a denial of basic human rights and that government was obligated to protect those rights. They'd written in the Declaration of Independence that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And they said to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. However, when they wrote the U.S. Constitution, it was silent on the issue of slavery, neither affirming nor denying it. The economy was given priority over morality. And we're still suffering the consequences of that failure of governance. However, the nation eventually awakened to the hypocrisy as well as the tragedy of slavery. Abraham Lincoln, in his historic address at Cooper Union in New York before the Civil War, rhetorically asked, what would it take to appease the slave states? And at that time, he was simply calling for a moratorium on allowing new slave states. After he reviewed a long list of failed attempts to deal with the issue of slavery, he said, and I quote, "The question reoccurs, what will satisfy them? These natural and apparently adequate means all failing, what will convince them? This and only this. Cease to call slavery wrong and join in them in calling it right. And it must be done thoroughly, done in acts as well as words. The whole atmosphere must be disinfected of all taint of opposition to slavery." Now let me make it clear. I'm not equating the threats posed by CAFOs to the magnitude of the tragedy of slavery. But the failure of governance is of the same basic kind, even if not the same attitude. Today we're calling for a moratorium on CAFOs. The political response to all previous attempts to regulate CAFOs has been of the same kind as the response to the attempt to deal with slavery prior to the Civil War. It seems that nothing will appease the defenders of CAFOs short of ceasing to call CAFOs wrong and joining with them in calling CAFOs right, in act as well as in words. This we simply cannot do. If we Americans have a right to life, as affirmed in our Declaration of Independence, we have a right to clean air, clean water, and safe food. These are the essentials of life if we are to have the liberty to pursue happiness. The Declaration of Independence also states that when governments are instituted to secure these rights, and it continues that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such forms as to themselves seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. How do we accomplish this? We keep on doing what we have been doing in our attempts to protect ourselves from the threat of CAFOs. We're certainly not winning every battle, but we're slowly winning the war. We're changing public opinion by making people aware of the reality of CAFO. And changes in public opinion ultimately will lead to changes in laws governing CAFOs or changes in government. I will simply add the encouragement that Lincoln chose in closing his speech at Cooper Union. Neither let us be slandered from our duty by false accusations against us, nor frightened from it by menaces of destruction of the government, nor of dangers and dangers to ourselves. Let us have faith that right makes right might, and in that faith let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand it. I believe we each have a duty, a responsibility, and a collective ability to make government work, to alter or replace it if necessary. Edward Howe, a Unitarian minister, is attributed with a quote in a report to the President. He said, I am only one, but I am one. I can't do everything, but I can do something. The something I ought to do, I can do, and by the grace of God, I will do. Hale also wrote, "Together is one of the most inspiring words in the English language. Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success." Tonight, we will each have an opportunity to learn more about what we should do and can do to address the problem of antibiotic resistance in CAFOs. And then by each doing what we can do and by working together, we will find a way to succeed. Thank you.